So, in the previous video I was in, I mentioned that the SNES was my first console. Well, Yoshi's Island was the game that came with it as the pack-in title. I knew who Mario was at this point, but having never played Super Mario World at the time, I had no idea who Yoshi was. But he was a dinosaur, and my younger brother and I were deep in the grip of Jurassic Park, so we were very excited. And honestly, Yoshi's Island was one of the best games I could have started with.
I too have a history with Yoshi's Island, though much less so. Much as I played Sonic 2 at a babysitter's house as a child, another babysitter I had a little while later had a Super Nintendo instead of a Sega Genesis. And for whatever reason, the game I latched onto was Yoshi's Island. Maybe it was my obsession with dinosaurs, maybe it was just the bright colors, but Yoshi's Island is right next to Sonic 2 as one of the first games I ever had a real fixation with. And I would try to play it whenever I possibly could, despite the babysitter's son insisting I try out some Speedy Gonzalez game he was enamored with that was basically just a Sonic clone. I don't know, maybe that game was good, I haven't played it, but god damn it, I wanted Yoshi. After the release of Super Mario World, Shigeru Miyamoto's team were convinced they had done everything they could possibly do in the realm of 2D Mario, and the only way they felt they could reasonably move forward for their next project was to just do something completely different. And the best way to do that would be to make a game with a main character who wasn't Mario. Miyamoto felt that Yoshi would be the perfect choice. The character had been gaining popularity in the wake of Mario World, and had starred in a few spin-offs of his own already. And so he approached Yoshi's creator, Shigefumi Hino, to ask him to design a new platformer starring the dinosaur. Being considered more of a cute character when compared to Mario, it was decided that Yoshi's game should be friendlier and more mellow than the typical Mario title, in part to appeal to younger and more casual players. Given this, eventually the team came up with the concept of Yoshi carrying around a baby Mario, as a way of explaining why Mario couldn't just save the day himself this time. And with this decision, it was decided that this new game, Yoshi's Island, while literally titled Super Mario World 2, would instead be a prequel to the entire Mario franchise. The story begins as the stork delivering newborn Mario and Luigi is intercepted by Kamek the Magic Koopa, who did so because he had learned that the brothers will eventually bring ruin to the Koopa Kingdom. Kamek only succeeds in kidnapping Luigi, however, and as the baby Mario plummets toward the sea, he lands on Yoshi's Island, square atop of Yoshi's back. As the various Yoshis on the island discuss what to do, they find a map with the baby, and pairing that with the brothers' connection to each other alerting baby Mario to Luigi's location, the Yoshis decide to relay the baby across the island, eventually bringing them to the castle of Baby Bowser, the last thing standing in the way of the brothers reuniting.
The goal of making Yoshi's Island a more casual-friendly platformer becomes apparent to those familiar with previous Mario titles. It's still a standard Mario-style platformer on the surface, but several steps have been taken to mellow out the normally hectic obstacle courses of the older games. Levels no longer run on a timer, allowing for more laid-back pacing and playstyle. The run button has also been removed from the equation, with Yoshi now gaining speed gradually and adjusting for slopes in different types of terrain. The game also handles damage in a much more forgiving way than a standard Mario game. Yoshi has a health bar measured by stars, and every time Yoshi is struck, baby Mario is knocked off his back, floating away in a bubble and gradually draining Yoshi's stars until he can manage to get the baby back. Should the countdown reach 0, Kamek's toadies take baby Mario, costing the player a life. Honestly though, the real reason to avoid taking damage is to keep from ever hearing this baby's horrible banshee shriek. Yoshi's health gauge for each level begins at 10, and will gradually return there should it drop below that. But he can collect more stars throughout each level to increase his gauge to a maximum of 30.
Also contributing to the more laid-back difficulty is Yoshi's newly extended moveset. You now have a flutter jump, which results in far easier platforming and more manageable aerial movement. Plus, it can be used multiple times per jump, granting the player ridiculous distance and allowing them time to scope out the terrain beneath them during a fall. Yoshi was also given a ground pound, which can be used to hammer in stakes, clear obstacles, or sometimes stun certain types of enemies. And of course, just as in his debut appearance, Yoshi can use his tongue to swallow enemies, and here the eggs he lays will follow behind him up to 6 at a time. Yoshi can then throw these eggs to hit far-off enemies or objects, and damage certain enemies that would otherwise be too dangerous to swallow or jump on. Eggs will appropriately ricochet off walls, floors, and ceilings, and can even skim across water. The targeting reticle can also be locked in place using the shoulder buttons, which helps in lining up precision shots, as Yoshi can still move and jump while aiming. Eggs come in different colors. Green are standard, yellow eggs release coins on impact, and red eggs release stars. Colored eggs can be found in a few specific levels, but you can also change the color of your current eggs yourself by flinging them into a solid surface, which will change their color, and then catch it with your tongue to reclaim it before it fades away. A few levels even allow the chance to wield giant eggs, which function the same as a POW block, clearing the screen of enemies by turning them into stars. The egg-throwing mechanic was introduced into the game specifically because it was something you wouldn't see in a typical Mario game, and it's definitely the defining mechanic of Yoshi's Island, in no small part because nearly every boss in the game requires throwing eggs to defeat.
While we've been referring to Yoshi in the singular tense throughout the narration so far, you actually play as several Yoshis over the course of the game, as they pass the baby Mario along from one level to the next on their way to reunite the two siblings. Super Mario World had already established that a Yoshi referred to both a single character and a larger species, and in addition to the returning green, red, blue, and yellow Yoshis, this game introduces new pink, light blue, purple, and brown variants as well. Curiously, this would be the only appearance of the brown Yoshis, which would be replaced by orange in any future games. Not that the colors actually make any real difference, mind you. They all play exactly the same, but playing as a differently colored Yoshi for each level does add a certain charm to the game, and keeps things fresh as you travel the island.
The game is split into 6 worlds, each with 8 levels within, and ranging in theme from plains to jungles to caverns to snowy mountains. Every 4th level is an enemy fortress with a boss fight at the end, and upon defeating both bosses in a world, a secret 9th level will be unlocked. These are usually high-scale challenges revolving around a specific gimmick, such as riding on the back of a seemingly invincible dog to make it safely across paths of lava, or reacting quickly to hit switches and dodge obstacles as you ride a series of high-speed platforms over a massive bottomless pit. And while the only objective in a Mario game would normally just be to get to the end of each stage, or in Mario World's case, sometimes finding an alternate exit to unlock secret levels, Yoshi's Island takes a page from Donkey Kong Country by keeping track of the player's completion percentage. But I feel it works a lot better here, because whereas Donkey Kong Country's levels were mostly straight lines and a lot of the secrets felt arbitrary and pointless, levels in Yoshi's Island are more wide open, with every objective item feeling consciously placed throughout. Finding the 20 red coins and 5 giant flowers, as well as finishing a level with a full 30 stars, will result in a perfect score. Flowers will also increase the chances of accessing one of several bonus games at the end of each level, which can grant the player extra lives or even usable items. Achieving a perfect score for each world will unlock one of the bonus levels for you to play at any time, giving you an endless reservoir of potential 1-ups and power-ups, meaning there's actual incentive for seeking out the game's secrets. Unlike Donkey Kong Country, where all you win is bragging rights and a number on a file select screen. None of the item placements ever feel unfair, and they're all pretty intuitive to figure out. And when it comes to stars, there's always way more available in each level than you actually need, and each of the game's checkpoints will also add 10 stars to your current total. All of this combines into a game where the real punishment for playing poorly isn't necessarily a game over, but instead the risk of ruining a perfect score. It's a game that encourages the player to really learn the layout of each level, and a casual run of the game will likely result in the player playing each level at least twice, the first time to simply get to the goal, and later attempts to try to find all the collectibles required for a perfect score. And much in the vein of Mario 3, the player can collect items, up to a whopping 27 at a time, in the form of cards. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that your save file will actually keep track of them too. In addition to the aforementioned POW blocks, there are also cards that grant stars in packs of 10 or 20. There's one that refills all your eggs should you find yourself devoid of a reliable source of them. Winged cloud cards will turn all the on-screen enemies into, well, winged clouds. And the magnifying glass card will reveal the locations of red coins and other hidden secrets. Although, if you look real closely, the red coins are a slightly different shade than the standard coins, which I thought was clever. It rewards the player for paying attention. There are also 3 varieties of watermelon found in some levels that Yoshi can use to spit at enemies, and there are cards to grant each one on demand should you so desire. Green melons act as a seed machine gun, red ones grant fire breath, and blues give ice breath that freezes enemies solid, which can then be shattered with a simple touch. Cards are granted in the various bonus stages, and there are also optional mini-battles in various stages, accessed by finding a key to open hidden locked doors. In these battles, you'll face off against bandit enemies in a variety of games of skill or smarts, with the winner receiving either 1-ups or cards. There's even a code the player can enter on the world map screen that allows you to play these minigames at any time, and the game will tell you about this should you manage to find and defeat a secret Chain Chomp enemy in World 5-4.
But perhaps most unique of all are the various transformations Yoshi can undergo in this game. These little metamorphosis bubbles turn into one of several vehicles for a short duration.
Si Optimum Prime!
The helicopter allows for speedy horizontal flight, although it struggles to alter its altitude or make quick stops. The mole tank can dig through dirt tunnels and crawl along walls. The submarine makes for easy underwater transport and can spam homing torpedoes. Horming torpedoes. The car moves at incredible speed and can extend its wheels to dodge obstacles or even as a makeshift jump. And the train is probably the most gimmicky, as it can travel along chalk railroad drawings on the walls. You only stay transformed for a certain amount of time, and if you can't reach a Yoshi block before time runs out, you're sent back to the beginning of the current segment and have to do it over. Even little baby Mario gets his own power-up in the form of the traditional Superstar, granting him invincibility and a little cape that allows him to parachute, as well as the ability to run along walls and even ceilings as long as he maintains his speed. Apparently, even more transformations were planned for Yoshi, and their sprites can still be found in the game's files, such as a plane, a mushroom, and a tree, but the most interesting to me is the Bob-omb, which I imagine would work much like the POW block or Giant Egg, which is likely why it was cut. Probably a bit redundant. So while this game does a pretty good job at teaching and reinforcing your abilities in-game, as a kid I was completely stumped by the boss of World 3, the Naval Piranha Plant. Now look, I was a pretty smart kid growing up. Naval clearly referred to it being in the water, like the Navy. What I didn't realize was that a part of the body was also called a navel, specifically the belly button. Kamek makes a reference to that in his dialogue, but I always thought it was a typo or something. It was spelled wrong. It took me weeks, maybe even a month or two to figure out what to do. I restarted my save file multiple times, always getting stuck at Naval Piranha. And one day, I just got mad. I started hitting buttons. Yoshi spun around, fired an egg, and it skipped across the water and hit his navel. And I cannot properly describe the sheer euphoria I felt when everything clicked. That is the most pivotal moment in gaming for me, when the joy of gaming and puzzle solving really and truly hit me. As it turns out, though, there's a pretty famous cheat involving the Naval Piranha Plant. If you throw an egg at the boss before Kamek transforms it, the boss will be defeated instantly and Kamek will be shocked at what you've done. Really wish I discovered that as a kid.
And as expected from the experts on Miyamoto's team, there's a lot of neat subtleties that really make the game pop, even if you don't always notice them. There's this segment in World 2-3 where you can use the Mole Tank power-up to travel along this ceiling below the screen, and while you can't see where you're going, the designers placed coins along the path in such a manner that the sound effects would act as the transformation timer. The final section of World 4-3 has both a high and low route that you can take, and they accounted for either possibility by making a perfect score achievable on either one. Baby Bowser's castle begins with a roulette of 4 possible doors that will determine which path you'll take to get to him, with each one being of drastically different difficulty. And probably my favorite example of subtle signposting, World 4-5 requires you to visit 4 different paths to acquire all the keys you need to progress, and placed in the scenery near each door is an enemy or hazard that informs the player of the kind of obstacles they'll be facing on the other side. It's stuff like this that you really start to appreciate when you sit down to analyze these games critically. One neat touch is that in addition to the game's title screen changing to reflect the number of worlds you've cleared, the music played on the level select screen will also gain more instruments as well. Yoshi's Island was in development for 3 years, and the team apparently spent a lot of time coming up with new concepts, as well as deciding how to best take advantage of the SNES's hardware, especially now that the console was in its final years and they were intimately familiar with the tech by this point. Early on, the team decided on the game's signature crayon drawing look for its graphics, which were all lovingly hand-drawn before being digitally scanned and meticulously recreated pixel for pixel into sprite form. Partway through Yoshi's development, Donkey Kong Country was released, and took the gaming industry by storm, selling millions of copies and establishing pre-rendered CG graphics as the future for video games. Despite the pressure from Nintendo higher-ups that this would cause, the Yoshi dev team staunchly refused to replace all their hard work with CG graphics, and so their way of appeasing the bigwigs was by agreeing that the game's opening and ending scenes would use pre-rendered visuals. And if you ask me, they absolutely made the right call in the long run. While Donkey Kong Country and other early pre-rendered games visually aged quite poorly, Yoshi's Island is a beautiful game, even to this day. Every sprite and background is vibrant and full of personality, with bright colors and cartoon shading that looks straight out of a storybook. One level in particular even has a background inspired by the famous Van Gogh painting Starry Night. The crayon-inspired style of Yoshi's Island would define the sort of visuals we'd continue to see throughout future Yoshi titles, eventually evolving into a sort of arts and crafts aesthetic with the most recent entries. And because the game remained in development into the Super Nintendo's final years, it allowed the team to make use of Nintendo's Super FX2 chip, a coprocessor that allowed for advanced scaling and rotating of 2D sprites in real time, and even limited use of polygons. A handful of SNES games used the Super FX chip, but only 3 used the Super FX2, including Yoshi's Island. And man, did the team make the absolute most out of it. Almost every level of the game uses the sprite scaling and rotating in ways both obvious and subtle, and Nintendo even coined the term morphmation to market the game's visuals. There are rolling boulders and giant chain chomps, there's spinning 3D platforms, even Yoshi's transformation sequences use the features provided by the Super FX2. And not to mention, every single boss in the game is transformed into a giant version of themselves, with Raphael the Raven in particular even being fought on a mini planet that rotates as the player walks on it. So advanced were some of these graphical tricks at the time that it's often been theorized that Super FX2 is the reason why the game has only been ported a few times, as future consoles and even SNES emulators apparently have trouble perfectly recreating the chip's unique features.
And what's ironic? At the time, a lot of older Nintendo fans sort of shrugged off Yoshi's Island almost entirely due to its graphics, which were decried as outdated and kiddie, while Donkey Kong Country was simultaneously held up on a pedestal as some sort of standard the rest of the industry should strive to. When in reality, Donkey Kong Country wasn't actually all that advanced and was really just using a lot of visual trickery, whereas Yoshi's Island was the game truly pushing the SNES to its technical limits. It just goes to show that the old cliche is sometimes all too true. You should never judge a book by its cover. But then again, we'll have to learn this lesson again during the GameCube era, but with an actual schism in the Zelda fanbase.
Despite all the naysayers from back in the day, though, it's not a stretch to say that Yoshi's Island was a success regardless. It's among the SNES's best sellers, and was the game that popularized the character and truly cemented Yoshi's status as a mainstay of Mario. And of course, this success would spawn an entire Yoshi sub-series that continues to see new entries to this day. It's also a great entry point for both the Yoshi games and the larger Mario franchise as a whole, with a gentle difficulty curve supplemented with optional challenges along the way, all wrapped up with a big climactic finish. All in all, Yoshi's Island is a great showcase of the character, and proved to many of us that Yoshi could be so much more than just a supporting character.